Thank you, Mr. Professor Lindley French. I am Ismet Ramadani from Euro-Atlantic Council of Macedonia as President. I have a short comment and only question, huh? Yes. I have a question for the Mr. Robert Bell as defense advisor in U.S. mission to NATO. You said you need a lot of money for new programs for partner countries. One of these partner countries is Republic of Macedonia, my country. You spend it and you are spending a lot of money for the reforms in Army of Macedonia, particularly when we were in the Adriatic Charter with Croatia and Albania. But we are in...
Can I have your question, please, sir? I'll be grateful.
Yes. We are in standby maybe 20 years for name issue. My question is, how is your influence, your impact as defense advisor in the political and diplomacy field to involve for the name issue and to help Mr. Metunimis as mediator from UN? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Park the answer, if you would, please. Any other questions? Jacques.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't resist to thank Robert Bell for the beer argument, also the three of the panel who support so well the Euro-Atlantic Association of Belgium. So I will take a question to the Senior General Al Adwan, and towards the last statement you magnificently summarized, terrorism must be beaten in the territory. Could you, General, say a little bit more on that? Is it a military victory? Is it towards the population eventually under control? Or is it also a convincing towards spreading ideology? In Europe, we know that fighting ideology is in a hot war 6 years and in a cold war 45 years.
Jacques, one final question. The lady at the back there.
Good morning. My name is Ilaria. I work for NATO Communication Information Agency at SHAPE. For all the gentlemen, I would like to ask a quick question. In the transatlantic cooperation in the industry, what do you see the role of NCIA in it? Thanks.
Bob, you have a question. General, you have a question. And the final question is to Martin and Rudy. Bob.
Well, I'm happy to address this first question. Let me say first that Macedonia has been an extraordinarily supportive partner for the NATO alliance. I personally have visited with your troops in Afghanistan, which have been providing critical force protection for headquarters in Kabul, and not just in Kabul. And it's always exciting to see your troops in action and to see that very bright Macedonian flag flying outside their command post. So I think there's wide recognition that Macedonia is a partner to NATO that is, as the Americans would say, voted with its feet. You've walked the walk and talked the talk of being a robust partner, and you've been a Partnership for Peace aspirant for quite some number of years, meeting requirement after requirement that the alliance has for potential membership. Now, as you well know, NATO is a consensus-based organization. There are 28 members, and no decision can be taken except by consensus. And that means, on the one hand, that you really have a solid basis when you do go forward. It also means that every member has a veto. If it had not been for that provision, I dare to say the United States would not have ratified the NATO treaty back in 1949. But the Vandenberg Resolution, which this association probably knows everything about, assured our Senate that it would be a consensus-based organization, which meant that the U.S. would have to say yes for NATO to act. And the fact is that heads of state, not the current heads of state, but heads of state at a previous summit, agreed that once the name issue was resolved, that Macedonia would be extended an invitation for accession. Essentially, that's what that provision said, and that's pretty much where things still stand. The United States doesn't have a direct role in this other than to certainly encourage the UN-led process to try to get to yes on the name issue to come to a successful conclusion. I've known some of the UN diplomats that have worked hard on this over many years. There are many times it seemed to me, speaking now personally, that there was a reasonable compromise on the table, but until all the parties concerned say it's acceptable, it's not acceptable. And as long as any party is saying it's not acceptable, if that party is a member state of NATO, there can be no invitation to Macedonia to join the alliance.
Sir, thank you very much for your nice question. What I mean during my briefing that the terrorism or the terrorist group should be defeated on the ground. What we are doing now, it's air campaign. Air campaign never win the battle, never. And we have to find a good partner on the ground. I think the United States and the supporters who support FSA, Free Syrian Army, and the other factions on the Syrian territory, they didn't succeed to choose the good partner. Now there's many players on the ground. The Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, the regime, United States, lots of countries, they are fighting. They are fighting whom? Fighting Daesh, fighting the regime, fighting al-Nusra, fighting Hezbollah, fighting a lot of factions on the ground. First of all, we have to unify our target. We have to choose one target and start by this target first. Which target is most dangerous to us, to all of us? It is Daesh. We have to fight Daesh first and then turn our weapons to another targets, which is less dangerous than Daesh. It is ridiculous now to say that we have to solve the Syrian problem without Assad. Assad should be part of the solution. The solution should start with Assad and finish without Assad. If you want to fight against Assad, you are fighting against Russia, you are fighting against Iran, you are fighting against Hezbollah, you are fighting against the army of the regime also. So the people on the ground, or the question which is raised up on our mind, from where we are going to get a military component on the ground, not from the neighboring country, not from the NATO, from the people or from the groups who fight against Daesh itself. If you look to the Peshmerga now, who fight Daesh, Peshmerga, they are not well equipped. They have lack of training, lack of weapons. We have to support them. We have to start with building their capacity, building their capabilities, the Peshmerga first, because now they are on the front line. Let the surrounding countries around Syria and Iraq to be to their borders, to be well protected, like Jordan, Turkey, and the other countries who surrounding Syria and Iraq.
Thank you, General. Very clear.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, 2 quick answers, please. Martin, would you commence?
Okay. The question is NCI's role in TADIC. I see sort of two elements to that answer because NCI has two roles. One is the sort of technology advisor to NATO for the development of future communications capabilities. And there I think they can use their knowledge or use their position to bring in industry so that they can get European companies, American companies, Canadian companies to make sure that their advice in what should be in the capability on a technology front actually includes answers from both sides of the Atlantic. The other part of their business is they're in contracting, which is more difficult. They contract for equipment, services, support. I actually think quite interestingly, there is an element here in that they might like to look at, and it's not in their control, it's in NATO's control, of should they be looking at the evaluation criteria of contracts, and should they be looking at some form of SME participation having value in the contracting? Should they be looking at partnerships between nations having value in the evaluation? Both of which I think would address the TADIC question.
Yes, and maybe just to add, if we look at the budget, and it's something we would say at the NATO Industrial Advisory Group, when we have all the countries around the table, not only the 28 member states, but also the partner nations, that the budget I gave you, for example, last year of 300 billion in the US and 80 billion in Europe, EU 28, that's about 300 billion spent on operations and maintenance and investment, but I think only 1% is being spent by NATO. So NATO headquarters, so like the NATO Support Procurement Agency or NCIA, they are spending only part of that budget. So if we talk about TADIC, it's not only at NATO, because it is promoted at NATO, and a lot of people at NATO headquarters, both sides of the Atlantic, are aware of the importance of it. But we also have to go, and I think that's then a role that you can play, also to the different member states of NATO and the partners to make sure that in all their national programs, that they don't forget that the TADIC part is important and that they shouldn't forget to include all of them, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to conclude with 2 minutes comment because I think it's important to put Bob's excellent pledge in its strategic context. I've grown old listening to pledges made by NATO members. In the old days, we can get away with this, pretending and not delivering. Not anymore. The worst case on NATO's eastern flank is the potential loss of allies to aggression. The worst case on our southern flank is the potential collapse of partners and allies across much of North Africa and the Middle East, with immense consequences for the Euro-Atlantic community. Make no mistake, these are now very plausible scenarios. Add to that a United States that's increasingly overstretched in Asia-Pacific, with the very real possibility of simultaneous crises in Asia-Pacific, the Middle East, and indeed in Europe. The essential challenge for we European members of this great alliance is that we will have to be credible first responders in the event of a major crisis which we simply have not conceived of since World War II. And the question I want to put to all of you in this room to take from this session is, are we up to that challenge? Because if we're not, then we are in very serious trouble indeed. Some ages forgive mediocrity. This is no such age. This session is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.